I'm Ben Sawyer.
I'm Bob Crawford, and this is The Road to Now.
Yes, it is. And we are on the road right now with some people who are doing great things. It's perfectly in line with what we care about here at the show, and we're very excited to welcome our two guests. I'll introduce them in alphabetical order. We have with us today Anita McBride, an expert on the legacies of First Ladies. She leads the First Ladies Institute at American University Center for Congressional and Presidential Studies. And my favorite small fact was that you consulted on Veep. Welcome, Anita McBride.
The best gig ever.
And our second guest today, she's the 11th Archivist of the United States, but beyond that has an incredibly deep history of working with nonpartisan initiatives within the federal government. Welcome, Colleen Shogan.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
We're happy to have you because you're here to talk about your new project. As if you didn't have enough, the two of you already. You're working on this incredible initiative to try to make history accessible to people, to bring new perspectives on leadership in American history. It is called In Pursuit. And let's just start this conversation. Could you tell us what you're working on and how you got to find that as your next project?
Colleen, why don't you get started since you are directing this for us?
Well, thanks, Anita. Yes. Well, In Pursuit is exactly how you described it. It is a project that will launch in 2026. But the goal of In Pursuit is to unearth the most relevant lessons we can learn from our nation's history to inform our present and, of course, our future. And the way that we're doing that in 2026, there's a lot of ways you can do that. That's an ambitious goal right there. But the way that we're doing this, and Anita is one of the co-chairs of the project, is that we are looking backwards in American history at our presidents and select first ladies. Because these are people, these are leaders in the United States that most Americans are familiar with, are comfortable with their history, and we're using them as a lens in which to understand and surface some of these most relevant lessons.
Colleen, in order to do so, you have enlisted the help of three former presidents and some of Ben and I's favorite American historians, as well as others. Can you tell us about kind of the cornerstone of this project?
Was a big process, and Anita was part of it as well, in order to recruit. We wanted to recruit prominent thinkers about that have been involved in public life. We wanted to recruit historians. We've recruited 7 Pulitzer Prize winners and people who, journalists who think about the role of history. And we wanted to urge them to write these essays that are very short essays. They're only 1,200 words. And we figured if we brought together, and we advertised this as a nonpartisan way to look at history, we were kind of curious who would want to be part of this project. Well, it turns out that pretty much everybody that we asked to be part of this project wanted to do something about it. And I think the cool part about enlisting the former presidents and former first ladies is that we're not asking them to write about themselves. We're not asking them to reflect about their time in office or their time of public service, which they all have in the form of books or memoirs or interviews. But we're actually asking them to look at other presidents or first ladies in American history. So President Bush will kick us off on this project by writing our essay on George Washington, for example.
Yeah, Anita, I'd like to bring you in here because you have a close relationship with the Bush family. You worked with H.W. Bush.
You're right. I started working for President Reagan, actually, right out of college and stayed on in the George H.W. Bush administration and then came back for George W. Bush. I did. I feel very, very fortunate to have had that lens and front row seat to history to see these three leaders in action.
So what made you guys realize that we need to get George W. Bush to write this first essay?
Well, first of all, he's a great writer. And I think, second of all, the idea was, of course, to reach out to, as Colleen says, the former presidents, the former first ladies. I mean, when you think about it, they're writing about presidents and first ladies, but who better than those who walk the walk and know the experience of doing it? It's a very small club. And President Bush is a great writer. So is President Obama, President Clinton. We were so fortunate that they agreed to do it. and selected, the presidents they wanted to write about. I think it's terrific that George W. is writing about the first George W., George Washington, and kicking this off. Laura Bush is writing about someone I knew she was going to pick, her favorite first lady, bar her mother-in-law, but is Lady Bird Johnson, as she always felt a deep connection to her. So I think the selections that they made are perfect for them.
That's what I was going to ask you is how did you pair the authors with the topics? Because, when I look at these, I go, you must have asked Bush first. That's got to be when you get to pick and you're a president, you go, the one you've got to be thinking about the most is George Washington. I feel like, because, he set so many precedents that you follow. So I'm not surprised with George W. Bush picking, Washington. I'm not surprised with Barack Obama picking Lincoln. I was kind of surprised to see that Bill Clinton is going to be writing about Teddy Roosevelt. That's going to be interesting.
It is interesting that he picked Teddy Roosevelt. He picked TR. But when you think about it, Roosevelt was president, TR, when the country and the world was changing, right? He ushers in a whole new era, the beginning of what will eventually become the progressive era and what will become modernity in the United States. And so you can imagine Bill Clinton, when he was president, the internet's just, starting to evolve, things are rapidly changing. I would imagine that Bill Clinton would look back at TR as someone who walked in, although a different time, 100 years earlier, walked in very similar path that he did. And apparently he loves to study TR. So he's been doing it. This was not his first foray into thinking about TR.
It's actually perfect because Clinton ran on and professed that he would be the bridge to the 21st century. And
Correct.
So in this context, it makes perfect sense.
That's actually good. We'll use that when we.
You should. You should.
When we
I could see Bill Clinton using it himself. So to promote this, talk about the Anita, the first ladies. We can name, Ben and I bet we can name every president in order. I think you and I, Ben, if we're put on the spot here, I can't name all the first ladies. I can name, maybe 10 to 15, maybe more than that. But I mean, talk about the relevancy in this context as we celebrate, the 250th anniversary of the country, of the importance of the first ladies.
Well, I think that's a great question, and thank you for posing it, because obviously you too are great students of history, but you too have been missing out on some of the inclusive history that we talk about in our country. And how can we examine American society, the American presidency, without considering the partners who were closest to the president? And it is, and in fact, one of the things that I'm working on at American University, running this initiative that studies first ladies and their legacies and their impact on American history, on our politics, our policy, our public diplomacy, is, the first ever textbook on this topic is one that was published in 2023 that I'm privileged to be the co-author of. And if you can imagine, 2023 is the first textbook in universities on this topic. So it's not surprising to me that some of the top line first ladies and don't know the others. And that's the opportunity we had with More Perfect. When I was asked to be a part of it, I did ask, well, of course, I'd love to be part of this project. It's a big civic education exercise at a pivotal moment in our history with the 250th coming up. But I wanted first ladies to be included. And of course, that was readily agreed. And Colleen is a big champion of first ladies and knows so much about them as well. So, of course, she readily agreed and helped to assign some first ladies to some of the authors. And then some of us got to pick the ones that we wanted to. I think you'll be surprised. We're going to uncover, facts and lessons in leadership and resilience and their character and how it's contributed to social movements in our country. So I'm excited for this piece of it.
Can I just say this? This might be a deep cut question right now. This is for Anita, because Bob, as soon as you said we could list the presidents, I started listing first ladies, and I went Martha Washington, Abigail Adams.
Of course.
Jefferson doesn't have one.
Correct. But Dolly Madison helped to serve as his first lady. Also, his daughter did before she left the White House to go back home. So that's it, actually. If you're about to ask a question, what are we doing about the presidents that didn't have first ladies? They're not included in this. We are really focused on the wives of the
Who
presidents.
was it? It would have been Jefferson didn't, Buchanan didn't, Franklin Pierce's wife died, right, when he was going, and Jackson didn't.
Well, Rachel Jackson passes away before. Yeah.
Jane Pierce actually did spend the first year and a half or 2 years, I think, in the White House. But, Buchanan didn't have a wife, and Harriet Lane, his niece, played an outsized role as first hostess and really was a first lady in every sense of the word. Martin Van Buren's wife died. One of you writes about Martin Van Buren, right?
Yes. And when we get to Woodrow Wilson, his second wife was Edith, correct? And when he becomes incapacitated by, I guess it was the flu and a stroke and all of that happens, it said that she is kind of running the show.
Oh, and she did. And both Colleen and I could talk about this for sure. There was probably the most extraordinary overreach of power by a non-elected official in our country's history, because she controlled access to the president for 17 months. No one saw him. The vice president saw him once. Members of Congress had limited, if any, visits at all. She disputes it in her memoirs, but there's an excellent book. Actually, one of the essayists that Colleen asked, Rebecca Roberts, who's written a definitive book on Edith Wilson, of course, disputes Edith Wilson's premise that she did not have control. Would you say, Colleen?
Well, I think the larger thing is this role of soft power and this role of influence, and that's going to be one of the overarching lessons from this project, that we focus a lot and rightly so, in the United States about exercises of leadership that are very public and forward-facing, but there's a lot of exercise of leadership that's behind the scenes, but just as influential, and that's relevant to Americans in all walks of life, not just those people interested in politics and history.
Yeah, Anita, I'd listened to one of the most mind-blowing things I learned listening to a great conversation between you and Lindsay Chervinsky was that at one point Congress wanted to tear down the White House, and it was actually Bess Truman who worked her influence. Could you tell that story?
That is true. And in fact, that's the essay that was assigned to me to write about Bess Truman. She's one first lady. When in researching our book, it covered so much about her. You know very little about her because she was not a public figure. She was really uncomfortable with the media. She also followed Eleanor Roosevelt. How difficult is that after 12 years of such a public figure? But this is while the Trumans were living in the White House, it was deemed uninhabitable. And it was going to collapse, frankly. And the Trumans were presented with options on rebuilding the White House. And the least expensive was the one that Congress wanted to do, which was tear the whole building down and start over. The Trumans pushed, and Bess Truman stepped out of her box and was very much a advocate for protecting the White House, because she felt that the American people would never forgive them or forgive the Congress if the building came down.
Colleen, I'm convinced that, the four of us are having this great morning conversation about the subject that we just love and we can't get enough of, American history. And I believe there are, and I've learned 4 things already today from our conversation. So I'm convinced that many Americans who don't consider themselves historically curious, if we could get this conversation, this is why we do this, right? And this is why you're doing what you're doing. What is your plan to disseminate In Pursuit to the general public?
It's a great question, because In Pursuit is for all Americans, but we are targeting people that are, I would call them, history curious. So they may not be professional historians or political scientists or someone who teaches history or even someone who reads a lot of books about American history, but they're people that are interested in the heritage of the United States, learning more about our shared history. We want those Americans to come in and learn about In Pursuit. And that's one of the reasons why the essays are so short. Each of the essays are only 1,200 words, which means you can sit down and read the essays in 10 minutes or less. And they were designed on purpose so that you could read them exactly how we're talking this morning, over your a cup of coffee while you're getting ready in the morning, maybe on your lunch hour when you have 15 or 20 minutes to yourself, or in the evening after you're done with everything, kids are in bed, and you have a little bit of time. If you don't have the time to read a lot of these long books, then come on and follow us on In Pursuit, and you will learn about American history all over the course of 2026. We're making all the essays free and available on Substack, and we made Substack our partner because they could distribute the essays for us without a firewall, and that meant that anybody who wanted to have access to the essays would be able to do so. But we're also going to be launching our own podcast for In Pursuit, which will reach another audience of people. We're going to have educational outreach, educational videos based on many of the essays through iCivics and the Bill of Rights Institute. We have a number of other partners that will be doing educational outreach through the Jack Miller Center on colleges and in universities. So we're trying to hit people where they are. And if you only can give us 10 or 15 minutes a week in your busy schedule, if you follow along, you will learn something about American history. I can guarantee you every week that you participate within Pursuit.
And I can guarantee for you, Colleen was a very tough editor. She kept everybody to those 1,200 words, and I'm sure a few people maybe will slide. But she's absolutely right. Everybody's so busy, but if you could be captivated by a lesson learned from each of these people in our history, I think that's a great service to our country.
I've already realized two great things about these essays and using them in my American history classes and my survey classes. The first thing being that, attention spans are not what they used to be. And I think these essays will be great to use in my classes. The second thing is, and this goes back to this 1,200 word limit. One of the requirements of my assignment for my class is that they have to write a paper that's 3 pages. And the best students go, I can go over, can't I? And I always say, that's not how it really works. It's great that you have more to say than that, but people are busy. So you need to learn how to consolidate your words. And I will say this, that having a 1,200 word essay by some of the greatest historians ever will be a great example of, of great people who are following that line. One of the things I think that is great about this, I myself, I've spoken, I do convention talks and things like this. And I speak on Washington and leadership, and it brings together, I'm also a comic, it allows me to kind of work in that realm, and it's been great for me. And so many of the comments I get are, wow, this is so interesting. People think history is a subject. They don't think that history is this living thing around them. And the ways you can bring that to them and deliver it to them in some other context, it really opens people's eyes. And what I love about your project is it's focused on leadership, which opens you up to an entirely new category of people, because there are a lot of people who are interested in the concept of leadership that might think they're not interested in history. So I wanted to turn this over to you because obviously that's leadership is a broad category. You're looking at various times. And so I was going to ask each one of you, what do you see when you look at these essays and the work you've done that is essential about leadership that doesn't change given its context? Do you find, Colleen, there are core values in leadership that we can find throughout the course of 250 years?
Right. I mean, we're starting to group as these essays are coming in. I don't have all of them completed yet, but probably a good chunk of them, over 50 of the 70 that are going to be coming in, have been completed. So we're starting to look over the essays and look over these lessons and try to figure out, are there some general ideas that we can learn from them as a whole. And I think a lot of people pointed out that there are certain character and virtues that we admire in our leaders. And that comes up over and over again. The idea of empathetic leadership, the idea of compassionate leadership. What does it mean to have duty and responsibility as a leader? That's a theme that we've seen over and over again. Another interesting theme that I've seen with a few of the presidents is the notion of compromise and leadership. So how far can leaders go to compromise in which they do not compromise their own moral principles or values? And what happens to leaders if they compromise their values as leaders? And sort of, is that a failure of compromise? So we're starting to see some of these lessons recur, and I think that will be very instructive to people, and once again, relevant to their own lives. If they're not involved in politics, they're not involved in history, that's fine. This should be relevant no matter what stage of life you're in, what career you're focused in, and what your interests are. It should be relevant to you.
Looking over the list of presidents and historians and essays that will be a part of this project, Ben and I both focused in on one in particular, and that's Annette Gordon Reed writing about Andrew Johnson, who I'm in North Carolina, Ben's from North Carolina, he's from North Carolina. But when I think of leadership and I think of these attributes that you just outlined that many of these presidents had and leaders have had throughout our history, I don't think about that when I think of Andrew Johnson or James Buchanan. So talk about these essays, about some of the kind of the they're more warnings maybe than they are, or they are more reflections of imperfection than they are of aspiration.
Well, that's great that she brought that up. I mean, this was a little bit of a puzzle to put together, because I had ideas of and Anita and our other co-chairs, Mark Updegrove, John Bridgeland. We had ideas of people who could write these essays, but trying to figure out where everyone would be slotted in for which essays was challenging. And I knew I wanted to ask Annette Gordon Reed to write an essay. And of course, the obvious thing would be to ask her to write an essay on Thomas Jefferson. But when I went to Annette's website at Harvard, and I started looking around and I clicked on her CV, I didn't realize that Annette had written a book on Andrew Johnson much earlier in her career. And when I saw that, I said, she's my person for Andrew Johnson. That it just clicked with me, because same thing with Drew Faust with Buchanan. Now, she hadn't written a book on Buchanan, but Drew Faust is besides have been the first woman to serve as president of Harvard, is also an amazing historian of the early Civil War and the pre-Civil War era. And I thought, well, she would be perfect as well. And I put a lot of focus. Could I get the best possible people to write essays about the presidents who we have considered to have failed? Because they're going to actually have a really hard task to be able to tease out that leadership lesson from those presidents that we have considered as failures, right? Not successful, but no, we still want a lesson. We still need a leadership lesson, because we need to be able to learn leadership lessons, not just from our great successes, not just from the George Washingtons and the Abraham Lincolns of American history. We also do need to learn about the times in which we failed as a country, and those are just as important as our successes. So I paid a lot of attention to some of these lesser known presidents and recruiting really astute students of the American experiment to be able to write those essays.
I recently searched Amazon for books on James Buchanan.
How many did you find?
One, and the title was America's Worst President. So anyway.
Wow.
But why here's the thing. Why did Buchanan fail? Okay, we all know Buchanan paves the way for Lincoln, right? We understand that. And we know in American history, we see failures in the presidency paired up with successes. So this happens all the time, these interesting pairings. But the question, of course, asking, Drew Faust, is why? And what can we learn from the fact that Buchanan does not live up to the moment that he confronts?
And a lot of this, that Colleen is right. I mean, and you've all alluded to it today, it's the context of the times in which they are serving as well. And how did they deal with the challenges that society, that the country, that the world, was facing. So it's an exciting opportunity to really, again, in so few words, to digest a lesson in history and a lesson in leadership together.
So Anita, let's talk about context for a minute, right? This project is coming. We are celebrating our 250th anniversary as a nation in a moment that is very polarized and we are actually very divided as a nation, and that comes top down and bottom up, both ways.
Sure.
It's going both ways. So, and when I say both ways, I don't mean right, left. I mean top down,
Mm-hmm.
bottom up in this context. So talk about this project and the political considerations you had to take into consideration when approaching these presidents, or when approaching these historians, or when assigning certain people to certain people.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you asked me this question, because I want to draw attention to something that in 2016, the Congress passed legislation to establish a commission to begin the planning of the country's semi-quincentennial, the 250th anniversary. So 10 years out. One of the first things that they did was commission a survey of people around the country, different ages, different demographics, locations, of what America means to them. So this was 10 years ago, 2016. And by and large, the people who felt the most connected to the country, the most patriotic, the most aspirational for the country's future, were those who lived through the bicentennial, because they remember what that moment in time was in 1976, the celebrations that took place in small towns, big cities, children dressing up as little Minutemen, Betsy Ross, whatever. I mean, I was in high school. I remember the tall ships. I lived not far from New York. And so that was interesting. Others had a less positive view about the direction of the country. And that, of course, is the moment in time that we're at right now. And that's why this exercise is so important, because it will illustrate throughout our history, we have gone through tough times. We've gone through even worse times than we are right now, right? The Civil War, of course, being one of the most difficult. There was no guarantee the country would survive. The Union would be preserved, but it took leadership to make that happen. One thing I went back and read myself is I reread the sections of President Ford's memoirs, because he was the president who presided over the bicentennial. And it was really interesting. On the days leading up to July 4th and on July 4th itself, he made multiple visits around the country to Boston, for the Battle of Concord and Lexington, of course. He went to Gettysburg. He went to preside over the passing of the tall ships, countries around the world that were honoring our country. And before he got back to the White House for the fireworks that night with his family, his staff had passed him notes of what was happening around the country, how the country was celebrating that day. And again, in small towns, big cities, the celebrations of things that people were doing. And what he remarked on is how grateful he was that there were peaceful celebrations all over the country at a time where he felt it was post-Watergate. So the country was coming out of a trauma of Watergate. It was the end of the Vietnam War. That was a trauma for the nation. And he felt that the country was on embarking on a period of healing. And I took such great comfort in reading that. And I think that there's an opportunity for that right now at the 250th too. Don't not bet on our country. And we are trying through this exercise to elevate those examples from the beginning till now of how people that we have trusted to lead the country, where they have done well, where they haven't, but how we persevered.
Colleen, did you want to add to that?
I associate myself with all the remarks that Anita made. And I think one of the hallmarks of this project, though, when I approached all of our essayists and all of our participants on the project, I mean, one of the explicit instructions when I emailed with people and when I provided them with guidelines about the essays, and I underscored this, was that this is a nonpartisan project. We all have opinions about the state of the United States today, about institutions, and that's terrific. Everybody should have those opinions. But we wanted to engage in a history project which was not ideologically motivated in any way, not motivated by any other preconceptions. Let the history speak for itself, and then let Americans interpret the essay that you've written and apply it to the lessons of today and the lessons of tomorrow. That was the explicit instructions. And I can tell you, a lot of these essays have come in thus far, and everybody has adhered to our guidelines. And it's, I think there is some people who think we cannot do history in a nonpartisan way that is welcoming to all Americans in 2025 or 2026. And I absolutely disagree with that premise. And I think In Pursuit will show people that we can do this. And history does not have to be divisive. It does not have to be ideological. It does not have to be partisan. It can actually be something that all Americans take pride in. We all own both our successes and our failures.
Agreed. It is interesting whenever, if you would have told me a few, let's say 12 years ago, you would have said to me, we're going to have a project where George W. Bush and Barack Obama are both contributing to it. I would have said, can't be done. And here we are in a world where we've brought those two together, yet we're still in a polarized situation in which both those characters have been written into some similarly biased category. And that's the struggle, I think. And Colleen, if I could, we talk about leadership here. This is kind of personal for you. One of the most interesting things in reading about your background was this, personally, in terms of your leadership. You were at this moment where you had to deal with the Equal Rights Amendment. And I listened and I read about this because I was fascinated by it. And I thought your response to this, which made very few people happy, I think, a lot of people were mad about this, was incredibly brilliant and the exact type of measured constitutional leadership that I really admire. Could you just briefly tell that story and your perspective on how you handled it? Because you wouldn't expect someone who's the head archivist has to make such a crucial decision. And that must have been stressful.
It was stressful. I could say that. I knew about this whenever I was being considered as a nominee for the position. So, obviously this was something that I had talked to the White House about. And before I would ever accept President Biden's nomination to serve as the archivist, I had to learn about the issue. I knew about the Equal Rights Amendment, but I had to learn about the issue that was confronting the nation today. The fact that 38 states had ratified the Equal Rights Amendment, but several states had done so many, many years after the ratification deadline had expired, even after it had been extended by Congress under President Carter. And so I'm not a lawyer by training, but I had to learn a lot about it. And that enabled me to understand what the Department of Justice's position was under President Trump. But that position was also continued under President Biden. That was a consistent position. So when I went forward to Congress in my hearings, I was able to say that unless Congress or the courts changed their mind or decided otherwise, I was not able, as the archivist of the United States, to publish or ratify that amendment. And of course, things proceeded after I was confirmed and time carried on. But then the drumbeat to change my position over time got stronger and stronger. And then after the 2024 elections, there was a new fever pitch to try to challenge those interpretations, put aside the interpretation that had been issued from the Office of Legal Counsel from the Department of Justice, and also set aside 2 court rulings at that time, both at the district level and at the appellate level, which said that the archivist could not publish the Equal Rights Amendment at this moment in time. And, as Archivist of the United States, when I took the oath of office, I didn't take the oath of office to promise to uphold the rulings of any given president, whether that was President Trump or President Biden. My loyalty is to the Constitution of the United States and the people of the United States of America and to the citizens. And so even though any personal beliefs that I have about the Equal Rights Amendment, I support the Equal Rights Amendment personally. So that was difficult for me to be able to put those personal beliefs aside and do what was best for the preservation of constitutional government. We need to have people in these positions who are willing to do that and are not willing to really do whatever needs to be done in order to put forward a political agenda. I hope that the ERA is someday part of the Constitution, but it needs to be part of the Constitution in a way that will be sustained. And this was not a way in which it was going to be sustained.
I am happy that this show could play a small role in getting that perspective on the Constitution and public service out to more people.
So important. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Colleen, we could talk all day about, your personal experience being the archivist at a time when President Trump took office for his second term, and I don't think this is nothing controversial, supporter or not supporter. He sees all positions as being political. He doesn't see nonpartisanship. He's not capable of seeing it. He doesn't want to see it. So you were caught up in that as the archivist, and you were fired because of that. But there was a project that you undertook at the National Archives before you left. And by the way, reading on this, everyone who worked on this project but one person is no longer at the National Archives. But the project has continued forth. It's called the American Story Exhibit. Can you talk about that?
Sure. That was a major initiative. Thanks for asking. It was a major initiative when I served as the Archivist of the United States. This is the new exhibit at the National Archives, the main exhibit of the National Archives, besides, of course, visiting to see the historic documents, the Declaration, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights that everybody goes to see when they visit the National Archives. But when I got there, very soon after I arrived, the current exhibit, which had been in place for 20 years, was removed. And hey, we're doing a whole new exhibit. And there was the basics of a plan from my predecessor about this new exhibit. In other words, like what are some of the topics that are going to be covered? But there was no details that were filled in. So we really went to work and we had to choose how we were going to present the story of the National Archives to the American people. And of course, to create an exhibit that would last for hopefully another 20 years, because this is how it works in federal cultural institutions. We don't change exhibits, every couple of years like some other private museums or institutions. And it was a terrific project to be involved with. I am so thankful that I had spent over a decade at the Library of Congress before that, because I learned so much when I was at the Library of Congress, seeing exhibits be featured at the Library of Congress and how they were constructed and how they were conceived, also in a way that was welcoming to all Americans, that was objective and nonpartisan. So I took those principles and everything I learned from those years, and we were able to apply it at the National Archives. And I don't think many people could say this. That exhibit went forward even after I was removed. It wasn't changed in any appreciable way. That's because we built an exhibit that would last. And it doesn't matter who is sitting in the White House. It doesn't matter who is in control of Congress. That exhibit will be one that all Americans can learn from and see themselves in when they visit the National Archives.
I think most Americans are not aware that the head archivist of the National Archives at this moment is Marco Rubio, who's also
That's
the
correct.
Secretary of State.
He has
But
4 jobs right now.
he has 4 jobs. But the person, his assistant, and the person who's really overseeing it, and his name is eluding me, and I'm sure you
Jim
can.
Byron.
Jim Byron. He worked at the Nixon Presidential Library, and he does have some qualifications for the position which he holds.
He's doing a good job there, honestly. I have to say, I think he ran, the Nixon Library very well. And
He
he's
ran
doing
the Nixon Presidential
the
Foundation, not the Nixon
not the
Library.
Thank you,
library. He
Colleen.
ran the
Thank you.
foundation. That's right, and that's an important distinction. But I think look, I understand, having worked in personnel, residential and White House personnel for a long time. This is always a tension when a president comes in and sees appointments. They have 4,000 appointments at their disposal that they can pick and choose. And, did I think it was the right choice to remove Colleen? No, I was a supporter of Colleen for that job. I worked with her. She's extremely skilled and knowledgeable. And I have been through this exhibit that she helped to lay the foundation of. And it's extraordinary. And I think Americans will be captivated by it, including the use of new technologies that just are so relevant for particularly young people.
So in this conversation, we've talked about James Buchanan. We've talked about the context of this moment historically and the tensions that exist today. We've also talked about the Congress wanting to demolish the White House and it being saved, by Bess Truman. And sometimes I am comforted by history because the outcomes are never predetermined or inevitable. But I'm like, man, we did okay. We did okay. Is that something that you hope Americans can take from this project, both Pursuit of History and the American Story Project?
I do. Our democratic experiment is extraordinary. It's, it laid the foundation not only for our country, but for others. It's not perfect. And in fact, the broader initiative that this In Pursuit falls under is an entity called More Perfect. We're constantly, seeking the nation to be more perfect. This anniversary in our nation provides a renewed opportunity to sort of examine that democratic experiment and how relevant it is, not only to studying and understanding history, but for our current life and for the future.
Well, I mean, I'll just say one last thing. I'm not a historian by training. I'm a political scientist. And so how do political scientists look at history? We look at things a little differently than historians. We look at long periods of change over time and try to see overarching patterns over time that we can learn from. And we see what comforts me about history, American history, is that it is a serpentine history. It is not a linear history. So if you're looking for constant, and an upward mobility and change that happens on a regular basis, that is not American history. American history is often 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards, and, a lot of twists and turns and curves. But over time, if we plot that out over time, we do see movement towards the fulfillment of the ideals that are contained in the Declaration of Independence, which of course is at the National Archives. So if we look at that long arc of history, we do see the improvement, and that should give all Americans something to think positively about the United States as we enter 2026.
Something that was not said in this conversation that I think should have been is that Ben is married to an archivist.
Yes. My wife she trains archivists in the PhD program at Middle Tennessee State.
I pushed for her to be a part of this conversation, but
there you go.
apparently
Another time, let's do it again.
she has much more important things to do.
Yes, my wife is the best Truman of my life, and that she does great things, but she frequently doesn't like the spotlight.
Behind the scenes. That's powerful too.
It is. Colleen Shogan and Anita McBride, thank you not just for joining us today, but for the fantastic work you're doing.
Thank you.
All this will be available in Substack. That Substack has already been launched. So if you go to the episode description, you can go ahead and sign up so you'll see them as they come out. And I look forward to reading these essays. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Road to Now. If you enjoyed this episode, please tell the world by giving us 5 stars and a review on Apple Podcasts or 5 stars on Spotify. Or spread the word directly. Just text a friend maybe, or share a link on social media. Anything helps and we appreciate it. And if you've got a friend who hasn't gotten into podcasts yet, let them know they can hear us every weekend on SiriusXM's POTUS channel 124. Now is the time when we say our special thanks to our supporters on Patreon and give a shout out to our Washingtonians. That list is Tanya Marsh, Mary Hawking, Tim and Caitlin Wells, Fig White, Matt Williams, Team Martin, Ann Williams and Frank Edwards, Nate Farrer, Jennifer and Magnolia, Chris and Teresa Adams, Joy Avery, Edward Carlson, and Aaron and Derek Garrison. Thanks to all you guys for supporting us. If you want to support our work and maybe get on that list, you can join us on Patreon at patreon.com/theroadtonow. You'll get extended versions of select conversations, extra episodes, bonus materials, and more. That's all available at patreon.com/theroadtonow. For more on the show, visit our website, theroadtonow.com, where you can easily search our back catalog and quickly find links to content. Why is it so good? 7 Ages Design. That's who made it. If you're looking for a website, go check them out. The Road to Now is hosted and produced by Bob Crawford and me, Ben Sawyer. Our associate producer is Gary Fletcher. This episode was edited by Ben Sawyer, and our theme music, like pretty much always, was by Paul DeFiglia. For Bob Crawford, this is Ben Sawyer. Thank you for listening. Take care.